Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining our Circular Cities webinar with Clare Miflin. So most of you know Clare already. If you don't, you very soon will. Clare, thank you for giving us your time today. Please take it away.
Thanks, Nigel. Yeah, great to be here. So as background, I am an architect. I have this nonprofit Centre for Zero Waste Design. We believe waste is a design flaw, and we develop circular strategies for buildings and for cities. So kind of integrating the systems, urban systems, into ecosystems as far as we can. I've structured this presentation in 4 parts, kind of how we can move to from linear to circular as an overview, and then looking at circular infrastructure, composting at the urban scale, and waste containerization. And I'll be stopping at the end of each of those sections for questions. So put them in the chat and we'll stop at the end of each. So looking at linear to circular, you know, our cities have all been developed for linear infrastructure. You know, goods or materials come into cities, any manufacturing, it typically happens all in the outskirts. It's delivered to these kind of large wholesale facilities, and then it goes into the city proper. And then similarly, there are these manufacturing zones on the outskirts of the cities that take our waste, which then goes to landfill or incineration, apart from the small amount that is recycled. So our cities are also zoned in that way. If we look at purple is that kind of infrastructure zone that I'm showing in the slide before, where things happen on the outskirts, and the yellow and red is the commercial and residential. So if we really want to change our cities to more circular, we have to look at the land use. So, I mean, it makes sense why we've done this, because manufacturing is pretty noxious, and those large waste facilities are not the kind of thing you want integrated with your commercial and residential areas. But in a fully circular city, there is no difference between goods in and waste out. So it's just a movement of goods and materials that are reused many times, and those kind of smaller and more distributed facilities for repair, remanufacturing, or recycling, that needs to happen much closer to the commercial and residential areas. So we need more of a patchwork of uses distributed across the city. So it's not just large manufacturing in the outskirts. And we've seen that the changing of zoning is kind of necessary. So this shows a circular system. So this is our linear system with manufacturing on the outskirts, commercial and residential in the center. And this is more of a circular system with more local and regional connections and some imported goods and materials, but there's a lot more circulating of materials within the city. Food waste processing and organics and composting can happen within the city, and reuse as well. Things can be rented and they go back and forth and remanufactured. And we've seen some movement towards changing that. For example, the NRDC, the nonprofit, developed model language for composting, which isn't currently in most zoning ordinances. So they have this model municipal zoning ordinance for community composting. Okay. Oh, whoever that is, if you could mute, if everyone could mute their microphones. And New York City, for example, has just changed its zoning resolution to add composting, which is now allowed in all zoning areas in the city at various scales, either as an accessory use or a primary use. And here on the right, here we see a community composting facility, the big reuse Queensbridge site under the Queensborough Bridge. Unfortunately, it is no longer there. The Parks Department owned that land and claimed they needed it back for parking of vehicles. So sadly, it's not there. But there are often these underutilized spaces in cities that can be used for composting, and then the resulting compost is used in street trees and green spaces citywide. So that's just an example of how changing land use policies is kind of necessary as we move to more circular cities. And approaching zero waste from the standpoint of circularity really involves minimizing consumption. So as we see here, this is kind of a great almost zero waste scenario where if you divert 90% of everything, you have a lot of materials going to recycling and to composting, and less to disposal. But if we go to reuse, we can really reduce the amount of materials totally. If we can have everything recycled and reused, then the amount of materials going to disposal, recycling, or composting or biogas is much smaller. So we really like to approach with the waste hierarchy, minimizing consumption first. Separation and recirculation of food scraps can be a great strategy to engage communities, supporting green infrastructure and reducing vermin odors and the negative impacts of trash, as we'll see later in the composting section. Most of what I'm going to talk about today comes from this Put Waste to Work campaign we did for the incoming administration back in 2021. And we kind of looked at how to do a plan for a circular city, for any circular city, but we were applying it to New York City in particular. And we took a comprehensive look at the design strategies, and they focus on either designing infrastructure into the urban environment for reuse, regenerating soils with compost, and collecting waste in containers, not bags, because in New York City we have bag collection. I mean, we're moving towards containerization, but at the time we did this, it was all bags, pretty much. So we're going to go through the three main categories and then focus on some examples for each. I'll move on to the circular infrastructure. That was mostly an overview in any case. So we have these kind of high-level strategies like integrating delivery and waste infrastructure, such as last mile hubs and package rooms. It makes a lot of sense to co-locate delivery and take-back infrastructure as we go towards circularity. And that's whether it's at the scale of a building where your package room is alongside your waste room. It makes it much easier then to take back reusable packaging if they're co-located. Similarly, at the scale of the street, it makes a lot of sense too, that you can co-locate that curb space, and like you can have curb space outside a building that could be used for deliveries or take back as well. And so here we can see that kind of example. That same space could be used by the UPS truck at a certain time of day, but could be used for commercial waste collection or residential waste collection at other times of day. So really kind of thinking about the time and the strategy to make the best use of our curb space. So we've also been working with the UK nonprofit Reloop on integrating infrastructure for deposit return systems for beverage. So New York State currently has a bigger, better bottle bill, but very few of the containers a bigger, better bottle bill to increase the deposit and increase the number of containers, the types of containers that would be accepted. And for that, we'd need much more infrastructure to take back, to be integrated into our dense urban environment. So we've been looking at how that is done now and how it could be increased. And for those of you who know New York City, know a lot of it is done in the informal sector on these and picked up by temporary mobile vans, and just looking at how we can integrate the informal sector and integrate more take back. We have to look at convenience, for example, in low density neighborhoods. It's probably going to be more about driving it in a car when you drive to the grocery store, which is kind of typical elsewhere in the country for bottle bills. But in a high density city in Manhattan, you need to be within like a 5-minute walk, we believe, of where you take back your bottles and cans. And we have to put in infrastructure both for residents, for small retailers, for the informal sector, for the canners, and for building managers who may separate in their building. So we've kind of taken a look at how you can integrate that infrastructure into the city and how you can see if that infrastructure could also be converted to take back reusable containers in the future. And again, we've seen that it would make a lot of sense to co-locate it with micro hubs. So there's a lot of these kind of on-street micro hubs. The street design DOT is working on to allow for this last mile delivery of goods. And whether that's on street or there's some under infrastructure, makes a lot of sense to co-locate that with the take back of bottles and cans, for example. Because the kind of delivery people, there's similar needs for facilities that could be co-located, such as public bathrooms as well, and also the truck access is a very similar use case. Then having facilities in your city for salvage, repair, and reuse. I mean, this is what I was saying before about reducing waste to start with. So reusable food and beverage serviceware is one of the largest things, because that's a lot of the contents of our waste bins citywide. And we can see the impact of single-use disposable food and beverageware in our public space, overflowing like this, with vermin in the park that make the situation worse. And then it gets washed out in our storm drains to the ocean. So it takes a lot of money to collect these items and keep our cities clean. And if we just put some money up front for reusable food and beverageware, there can be a lot of savings long term. I mean, typically there needs to be money and investment from the city to set up these kind of reusables. And so there needs to be investment from the city as well as policies to limit single-use packaging. And this shows, there's often on the left here, we see in Singapore, there was a policy that required reusables for dine-in their hawker centers. They have a lot of food halls. There have been similar policies that requires reuse for dine-in in Berkeley, California. But there do need to be washing facilities. For example, France required reusables for all the fast food, but the pushback from McDonald's really actually weakened European policies that were set to have much higher requirements for reuse. But because they hadn't got the infrastructure in place first, there was a lot of pushback and it backfired. So in Aarhus in Denmark, they realized it's best to start with ensuring the infrastructure is in place. So what they did is they put out a bid for a vendor to install the cups, return stations, and do the washing. And so here we see the washing facility and the public space return stations for the reusable cups. So it was Tomra, the reverse vending machine company, that won the bid, and they developed this washing facility, very high-tech washing facility for all the reusable cups. Then they worked with a lot of the cafes in the city and also with their events. They have a lot of kind of whole city events. And it was actually one of those events that was the impetus for this reusable system to start with. Apparently the neighboring town complained that all the Aarhus cups washed up on their beach and that they should come collect them. So they were like, okay, we can. They installed booms on their canal so the disposable cups didn't wash out to the ocean. But they also were like, maybe this is an opportunity to do something upstream. And it's been very successful. In the first year, they actually have 10% of the disposable cups citywide within the system, and it's growing. So they're working on increasing it and even going to other cities. I'm not going to go into these other strategies in detail, but there really other infrastructure needs to be developed for circular material flows, like whether that's eco-industrial facilities where waste from one product becomes feedstock for another. We see these in some cities, just giving space for these companies that have circular processes. The waste processing on underused land, that the Queensborough Bridge and the composting was an example, but it could be anything like storing salvaged bricks or salvaged lumber that you don't want to truck far out of the city and back in is a good example. And it's expensive for those kind of companies to rent space in the center. So partnering with entities really helps. And then zoned waste collection systems. We don't have that in New York City. We're just starting to do that for commercial waste, but they can incentivize infrastructure development because if a hauler knows they have contracts for a certain amount of time and there's not so much competition in one zone, they can put in infrastructure both to increase diversion and to pre-process in some circumstances. And then policy can obviously incentivize waste reduction, whether that's a save as you throw, pay as you throw type system where you pay less for the recyclable streams and pay more for trash or nothing for the recyclable streams, has been shown to reduce waste in many places. Obviously, there's always a balance with access controls and how that works, but it was something New York City was going to study and I believe should study. And then just requiring management planning in new construction is something that we've been working on for a long time as architects. It really needs to be designed into the building. And now in New York City, from our advocacy, all new residential buildings over 150 units do have to produce a waste management plan, which has to be reviewed by the city, which helps ensure there's enough space. And then construction and demolition waste obviously is a huge issue too, and there's a lot that can be done policy-wide to support that. And actually New York State just introduced a deconstruction model ordinance for municipalities in New York State. But there's a lot that could be done there too. One thing that's kind of underlies a lot of our strategies is this idea of equal convenience disposal. Like New York City, as many cities, have been built with trash only infrastructure, a trash chute that used to go often to an incinerator in the building. And then they've added recycling, and that's like in the central area or in the basement, and it's less convenient. And whenever you make recycling and food scrap drop-off less convenient than trash drop-off, your diversion rate suffers. So whether that's in a building where we don't like to have desk bins, we'd rather have a central waste station, wherever you can get equal convenience disposal, you're going to have higher diversion rates. That's why we're advocating at the moment that New York City is actually doing trash only containerization. So when you do that, the best practice is to have custom apertures for each stream, custom colors, signage on the front, on the top, on the back. This is Italy, New York City. The Footprint Group did the design of this waste station. They also have space here for the trays for reusables. Here's another kind of waste station, Bush Systems, where clear signage that you can still see when you're putting it in the aperture, different shaped apertures, just really helps. And then controlled access is something that can be used in conjunction with pay as you throw. This is actually from Korea for food waste, where you have the card and you weigh your food waste and you are charged for it, but less than you would be for other waste streams. So I'm going to stop. That was the first on circular infrastructure, and just see if we have questions for that section.
Thank you, Claire. Yeah, we do have one. Where the plastic reusable cups are going through the large sterilisation wash process, do you know if there's been any concerns about microplastic generation from that high temperature washing at all?
I actually don't know the answer to that question, but I think they may be. I'm trying to think the material of the cups, if they are a material that generates microplastics, I'm not sure. But I know they looked into the material for the cups closely, but no. If I find out, I'll send that to you, and maybe you can send that out. But
Thank you so
yes,
much.
we're
Really
looking at
interesting
some
question.
We're looking at some reusable systems for some work we're doing here in New York City. And yeah, there's the stainless steel cups, which are an option, but it's always a balance of cost versus materials. And you know, they can also get the water marking on them so they don't look so clean. It's just always a balance. And most of the reusable cup systems worldwide do use some form of plastic, polypropylene, or whatever it is. But yes, and I'm sure there has been investigations into microplastics, but I would advise looking at Upstream. That nonprofit has a lot of good information about reuse.
Excellent, thank you.
Now I'll move on to composting at an urban scale. We really believe in distributed small-scale composting through the city. We realize that in a dense city like New York City, we probably don't have use for all the compost that could be made within the city, but we do believe all soils should be regenerated with compost, because healthy soils is a big part of healthy green spaces and healthy urban trees. And what it does to engage communities to reduce and separate waste is also huge. So we believe that there should be guidelines for on-site composting that parks and green space users can use. It should be incentivized. The city should support it. There should be educational or volunteer opportunities. And we really like composting of food and horticultural waste together. We think if composting happens in parks, having food scraps as well helps break down the weed seeds, because it's a higher temperature, and can help engage volunteers. There's many scales to do composting and different costs to the city. You know, small scale composting in school gardens or backyards is something cities can help incentivize and give education and materials for. This is medium scale processing. This was the facility under the Queensborough Bridge was showing, where there's volunteers come and help compost, and actually seeing tangibly how that process works, I think really inspires people and lets them understand what circularity means at a very tangible level. And then we see that we can have drop-offs, which can be like in the farmers market type drop-off, which are typically manned, or unmanned drop-offs. This is in a New York City housing authority. This is actually a metroSTOR food scrap drop-off here, alongside drop-offs for paper, cardboard, and recycling. And then there's curbside collection that's happening now in New York City. This doesn't actually go to compost. Most of it goes to the wastewater treatment plant and gets made into biogas, which is way better than going to landfill. But we do really believe in microhauling and making compost locally as well. So yeah, we like to say that community compost makes good soil, both literally and figuratively. So, you know, the world's soils are degrading at a huge rate. So making soil better really can make a healthier city. New York City has goals to expand the tree canopy, increase stormwater detention and infiltration, reduce carbon emissions, and grow the green workforce. And so composting can play a role in all of those. And I think that as cities integrate nature-based solutions, composting is a really valuable tool to engage people in waste reduction and green space stewardship. So we really think it should be incentivized for street trees, green space maintenance. For example, in your green infrastructure maintenance guidelines, it can be there. It can be part of codes. In Washington State, they have this Soils for Salmon initiative, which requires the use of compost in many new development or redevelopment processes. So if you're going to have an impervious surface, you have to apply compost alongside. And that's really for its value in filtering out pollutants, so the water is cleaner in the waterways for the salmon in that ecosystem. And this is another, I learned about this at the ASLA conference. Circular Philadelphia is actually doing these trials where they're making soil from local compost and using using sand made from recycled glass. So a really circular solution where you're actually making soil from waste materials in the city. And in Seoul, there's a lot of rooftop gardens that use compost or fertilizer from the food scraps. And there's also a lot of, as well as all the benefits I've said already, there is a lot of health benefits, like just playing in healthier soils, compost-rich soils, has been shown to increase the immune system of people within 28 days, actually. It was a Finnish study. Yeah, kids just playing in healthy soil increases their immune system in 28 days. They also, through community gardens, encourage healthier diets. Vegetables grown in compost-rich soil are much higher in minerals and more healthy. And there's social resilience and mental health benefits. So we really believe in increasing the amount of community scale composting in cities. And then it can be used for your stormwater infrastructure. New York City has spent billions on rain gardens, and compost can hold 6 times its weight in water. So it can ensure that rainwater infiltrates faster and better. So rain gardens typically have engineered soil, and because you can really determine the infiltration rate, and compost breaks down. So if you do use it, you have to apply over time. But in green spaces like this, where the grass is often heavily compacted and the water is not infiltrating, as we see here in this heavy rain, if all this park had been top dressed with compost in combination with trees and shrubs at the low points to allow the water to infiltrate deeply, we wouldn't have this flooding. And for street trees, if you add compost regularly, it holds more rainwater and then increases the cooling effect and reduces the likelihood of drought damage to the trees. So that's my thoughts on how to integrate composting into cities, and I'll stop there for any questions there.
Well, thank you, Claire. We've got a couple of interesting questions from Barbara, one of which is probably from the earlier section, but that's fine, no problem at all. And I'll do my best to pose this, and I hope I've understood it correctly. And Barbara, you're welcome to come in if you wish. But where cities are changing their collection process and large trash containers are becoming surplus to requirements, are you aware of plans where they've been, or is anyone, where they've been reused for recycling? Have a recycling partnership been involved with this? Can they be used at apartment buildings, that sort of thing? Have you come across anything like that, Claire?
No, I haven't, but I like the idea. I mean, generally, yeah, as we divert more recycling and more food scraps, having a smaller trash bin is necessary, and that's what pay as you throw incentivizes. But actually reusing these perfectly good bins for a larger building, I don't know of any city who has done that, but I think it's a great idea. I mean, using it for a different stream like recycling's tough because often they're color coded, then it would be the wrong color, but for a larger building makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it does. I've got one more question, but Veronica, do you want to come in there?
Sorry, I just answered. I put my 2 cents in the chat.
Excellent, thank you for that.
About reusing containers.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So using in community schools, that's excellent, thank you. So second question is around trash cans, public recycling trash cans that discourage the homeless from digging through the garbage because the recycling is actually out on a sort of a rack at the top. sort of holes that you can put your cans
yeah.
and bottles in. The comment is that Barbara hasn't been able to see that, hasn't seen these available recently. Now, as a trash can supplier, that is something we've been asked for. We haven't done very much of them, but it is something we can do. And I guess I'll just throw this comment in here. I've noticed in cities where there is a deposit return scheme and there are a lot of unhoused population, there's some real big issues surrounding this market for recyclable materials, breaking cans open, breaking dumpsters open, organised gangs actually going around and collecting this material. I think some cities are taking the approach where you actually make the can more secure, so it prevents them from getting it. Or, like you say, one is, well, we actually just put those recyclables in a rack for people to take. Any views on that, Claire?
Yes, definitely. I mean, in New York City, a huge amount of our bottles and cans are recovered through the informal system of canners, and it's some of the most vulnerable people who are doing that. So I think it's something we've thought about a lot as we think of waste containerization. Like, how do we ensure that we're not taking away the livelihood of marginalized people who are doing a very good service to the city in terms of taking bottles and cans. We have seen various initiatives, like the Binners project in the Northwest has like hooks, so people, when they put out their bins, can separate the bottles of cans and put it in a bag on a hook on their fence. I think that's in Vancouver. We've seen here in New York City, actually, building managers actually separating out bottles and cans and giving it to a particular canner. This building did not want the canners opening up their bags on the street and going through them. So they're like, okay, we'll separate them in the building and give them to the canner so nobody's going through our waste. So I think there's a lot of solutions. Also, in another city, they are having a project where they allow the canners to come have a relationship with a multifamily building so they can come in and sort inside, giving them access to the waste rather than on the street. But I think it's a difficult balance. I've seen canners with barbecue tongs going into Big Bellies to try and take bottles and cans. And obviously, that's not really a good solution for anybody. I've also heard from BIDs here in the city, business improvement districts, that they've noticed that occasionally that their recycling will suddenly go down, the fill volumes across all of it. And they believe that some canners have access to open it and to get inside, and they're removing the bottles and cans, and actually is helping the bid because they're not having to collect them so frequently. So I think it's ensuring access for canners that doesn't involve the detriment of public space. It's balancing that. We don't want bags to be opened all over our sidewalks, and most canners do make sure they clean up afterwards because they want to keep having access, but still it takes up public space. So making it easier for canners to have access, like those bins with the ledges. My only issue with those bins with the ledges, there's not a lot of room and a lot of people don't use it. So then you have to go through in any case. But I think there could be options of public space bins, especially, in New York City, are horribly contaminated so much of the time. So much of the stuff that goes in the recycling bin isn't actually recycled unless a canner pulls it out. So maybe having bins with smaller apertures and just bottles and cans and having canners have that access can work. But it's a very difficult problem, and the material recovery facilities don't want to lose their materials sometimes, but I think there's space to work it out so everybody gets what they need, and material that is pulled out by canners or by people who take back deposits, that can be made back into food grade material. So it is a higher value recycling than what goes to the MRF generally, slightly higher.
That's helpful, thank you.
Very
so
long
we've got
answer.
one that's good. We've got one relating to compost. Do you have any advice or views regarding the use of bio bags as opposed to plastic bags with the collection of food waste?
Yes, I mean, New York City allows plastic bags, but I just think to screen them out, you must waste a lot of food. You must screen out a lot of food waste as well. Like you can't really perfectly screen out plastic bags. So I think bio bags, I mean, in Denmark, they just have bio bags and they supplied them. It does make sense, but again, it depends where it is in the system, you know. Some bioplastics get screened out anyway because it's difficult to tell what's what. So it depends a lot on the scale of the system and what's happening to your food waste. So it's a tough thing to give a blanket answer on, I think.
Yes, agree. So we've got one or two others we'll carry forward, but I'll carry forward to the end, I think.
Okay.
Claire, if you carry on with this section,
Yep.
that'd be fantastic. Right. Thank you.
Okay, so pretty obvious why we care about waste containerization in New York City because of the density and the impacts to public space. It just needs to happen. And ever since we did the zero waste design guidelines, we pushed for waste containerization as a way of helping to get to our zero waste goals. So that's why we're upset that New York City is currently pursuing containerization for trash only, which will just get us further away from our goals. Instead, we need containerization that helps get us to our goals. So, I mean, there's ideas of how to include increased diversion and volume reduction through having a central waste room or having compaction equipment or on-site equipment to process food scraps. All this kind of thing can help reduce the volume of material that has to be containerized, which is a good thing. And this is the waste management planning for a building that we've been talking about for a long time, like how should an architect design that into buildings? And it's really, you know, you have to plan the whole process. How is stuff separated? How is stuff moved? Do they move one stream at a time in one dolly, or do they have to have bags so they can put multiple streams in one dolly? You know, that has to be worked out. There needs to be enough storage space for each waste stream, or whatever is separated will not stay separated. You know, markings on the floor can ensure the tilt trucks go back in the right space. And then considering how the waste is picked up. We really feel like this has to be really thought through. That underlying principle of equal convenience disposal has to be followed. Next, collecting containers of waste rather than bags. You know, there has to be guidance about where they're placed. There has to be space in the curb line. You have to retrofit trucks often. So it's a difficult thing to figure out. And for our higher density cities, it's a real spatial issue. So we've looked at multiple solutions around the globe. In many cities, four-wheel bins are a solution, whether they're temporarily staged. Here we see them temporarily staged at the curb in Paris. In Vienna, they have a lot of four-wheel bins for recycling, staged at the curb, and then they have other types of materials that are staged within the building. And your rear load trucks that are common in most cities worldwide, and we use in New York City, can be retrofitted with lifts so they can collect bags, two and four-wheel bins. Docked wheel bins is another option. This is a metroSTOR product here shown where you have the four-wheel bins within a dock. Is a little like what we were showing in Vienna, but a little more screened. And we're looking at piloting that in Hoboken, where previously, you know, residents were putting their waste in these trash cans. So if it goes to these dock containers, we'll be greatly increasing the diversion rates. Side load containers, another way of doing it. Here on the right, we're starting a pilot in New York City for these side load containers for trash only, but they're very common in Spain and South America. Here we see them in Barcelona for all waste streams. And here in the middle, these are actually hoist containers, which are often used for the heavier waste streams, but can be used for any waste stream and can be a little tighter and more neatly designed in the city. They don't require a left or right hand truck like the side loaders do. So there's so many things to think about, how to tie it into urban form and how they're used by residents, or New York City's only allowing building supers to use them, and they're going to be access control. Lots of things to think about when you want to containerize a city. But one thing we're looking at is the way waste has been containerized in lower density neighborhoods. So in New York City, they've required under 9-unit buildings to use 2-wheel bins, and on streets where you have storefronts at the front, there's just no space for these bins inside, so they're crowding our sidewalks. So we're really advocating to have shared containers, whether they're wheel bins or side load, in the street to free up the sidewalk so it's not filled with bins like this. Here you see, the city solution is really requiring bins just for trash and organics, and just a 6-unit building with a storefront would require so many bins that it takes up the whole storefront. So it really is not good for public space. Whereas our proposal would allow the residents to come straight down with their waste and put it in shared containers for all waste streams at any time of day. We're also looking for large buildings. The city is suggesting that the bags from the trash chute are brought up and put into these permanent bins in the street. Whereas we think for large buildings, it makes much more sense to have the trash chutes connected to a 4-wheel bin, which is staged temporarily, and to also collect recycling from 4-wheeled bins and stage them on different days, collect them on different days. So it's equally convenient for all streams, whereas in the city solution, the porters can take out trash any time, but they will need to save their recycling and set it out in bags once a week, which is less convenient for them. And that will affect diversion rates. Collection schedules is another thing that needs to be adjusted. Here in New York City, there's neighborhoods that have one families that get 3 times a week collection of trash, the same frequency that the financial district with its residential towers gets. So really modifying collection schedules for density, and also, having 3 times a week, 1 time a week food scraps and recycling is not incentivizing the behavior you want. We should be increasing collection for food scraps and decreasing it for trash. And then having drop-off sites for other waste streams is important as well. So yes, this is showing how less trash, more of your recyclable streams makes sense to incentivize the right behavior. We do waste management plans the whole time, and we have to show buildings, well, if you do a good job, you need more space for your storage. If you do a bad job, you need less, and that's just incentivizing the wrong thing. And then looking at how you integrate them into streetscapes is important. Below grade waste containers can reduce space, but of course it's more expensive. Shared waste facilities makes a lot of sense. We've seen that happen in Battery Park City, where multiple buildings bring waste to one roll-off. We've seen it happen in Roanoke, where they have a shared waste drop-off for the downtown because they don't want bins in the public space. And ultimately, it's like, what do we want our city to look like? Do we want it to be this linear city full of empty buildings, full of unused things, these storage facilities, fulfillment centers, our public space full of deliveries and trash? Or do we want a city with libraries, engaged communities, green stewardship, fixing, repair, where people really have tangible ways of helping make the city more circular and help weaving these urban systems into ecosystems, and we get rid of the trucks on our streets? We think of more low impact vehicles. I mean, the difference is just huge. So that's what motivates me. And I hope that is compelling to you all too.
Excellent. Thank you, Claire. So one question we've got is whether you've got any thoughts around an engagement strategy for construction and demolition waste and recycling?
An engagement strategy. I mean, I think there's so many things to move towards circularity of construction and demolition materials. I mentioned earlier, there's many policies like this deconstruction ordinance that New York State just put out that requires municipalities, if they want to get grants, to put in some kind of space that these materials can be stored in, or an auction where they open up the building before deconstruction and allow companies to come in and bid on the materials in the building. I mean, there's so many ways Portland did the requiring deconstruction for older buildings, and then they brought it progressively forward. I think other cities have done like where you get with the demolition permits, there's kind of an incentive bond program. I mean, there can also be things for certain streams, like things like ceiling tile or carpet are easily divertible if in New York City, for example, because we have manufacturers that will take that back. So putting that into building code and regulations that has to be diverted is something else. And then just developing the infrastructure for it, because some materials like wood and bricks, there's a lot of demand for that. You know, a lot of architects like to use aged bricks and aged wood, and it's stronger and better, but ensuring there's facilities for that to be stockpiled to make those businesses work is a difficult thing too. So I think a bit more in policies, but there is also education and engagement of architects that needs to be done. And then there's also some real difficulties in terms of actually using those materials. So often, even if these facilities are there that have all these reused materials, it's often the one-off person that comes in to do their renovation. It's not like architects are specifying those materials because they don't come with a warranty, because they are not necessarily available when they're needed. So that part of closing the loop is the one that's the most difficult to close, I think. And, you know, it comes with figuring out who's going to take the risk for that and how that's going to work so they can be uniformly specified. And some companies are doing stuff like that, like Doors Unhinged, that take commercial doors, very standardized, and then sell commercial doors so you can buy from them, and they have kind of standardized that and taken the risk. So there are some examples, but it's very tiny.
That's good. You've shown a number of different examples of different containers and different systems. But a question back along about whether the design of the bin is likely to impede participation. Have you got any thoughts around that? How, you know, good design can make it easier for people?
I mean, a lot of people, especially after COVID, don't want to touch lids. So that's a huge thing. Does it have a foot pedal? I mean, some people, and is a foot pedal easy to use? Because with the curb, it can be tricky to, like, how can you use the foot pedal? I think the design of the bin is huge in terms of getting people to use it. Making sure it's really clear what streaming goes in which bin is definitely important. There's a lot of cases where people just leave waste at the side, maybe because they didn't want to touch it. And then as soon as there's a bag alongside a bin, there'll be more bags alongside. So I think the collection frequency and maintenance of those bins is huge too. We've seen some cities do programs that are more like adopt a bin. So a local community member has a kind of direct line to the municipality if they're broken, and they also help maintain them. So I think engaging communities in maintaining them or engaging bids is another way to do it. But the design of it definitely is important, and whether you can clean underneath them as well.
That's really helpful. So I've got a question regarding whether you have any examples of a training manual or guidelines for new tenants to a building. I think this touches an interesting point, because especially where you've got a lot of churn of residents, a lot of new residents, keeping up with that sort of education is really important. Any thoughts around that?
Yeah, that's really difficult. I mean, we've often heard if you have Airbnbs in a building and, resident churn, it is much more difficult to keep that up. I mean, that's why we are really focused on the design side, making sure it's super clear. You use photos in your signage or the clearest kind of visual cues, so you don't have to rely on language so much, or the clearest icons you can. And then education where you can, especially in buildings where there's churn, where you keep it up, whatever communication building managers have with their tenants. I mean, we've known buildings where when you get the lease, they talk to them, to the residents, and tell them how to throw out the waste. So whenever you have a new person, you're continually educating them. But yeah, that is a huge issue for sure. But I think we work from the design side, ensuring that the design is clear helps.
That's good. Interesting question. We're struggling with the transition towards circularity in small cities. Any inspirational model that you would recommend?
I mean, Zero Waste Europe has lots of case studies that some things are really inspirational. There was this one city in Italy, I've forgotten the name, that they didn't want a new incinerator. So they really all got together and improved their diversion rates hugely. Yeah, I would look at Zero Waste Europe for some case studies that are inspirational.
That's helpful. Any examples of a clever program to incentivize tenants to break their delivery boxes down?
We've looked at cardboard breakdown stations a lot, rather than incentivizing, but we have seen Stuytown, a big development here, had the safety knives, and they have the slots, and there's just space for tenants to break it down. Because I think often people just don't have the knife to do it. So providing the facilities to do it helps. Incentivizing, I mean, the one thing is, we have another person who gives tenants, the building manager, if you don't recycle your box properly, the person's name's on it. So they give them a leaflet, a warning, and then if it happens a couple of times, you fine them. I mean, that's the one good thing about delivery boxes. You know who did it.
I love that. The breakdown station with the safety knife. I think that's fantastic. Good. So question here, what sort of struggles have you faced in cities that are very car-centric, might have chaotic areas without a lot of local government oversight?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, we haven't worked in so many cities, but we are looking, in cities that don't have so much oversight. I think you do have to rely more on the community-led initiatives and kind of team with kind of local organizations to work on things. But I don't think the strategies are so different in terms of how you approach it and designing those systems into the city. But they may be less top down and more bottom up.
Another interesting question from Barbara. Any thoughts on creating a system for Amazon to use reusable boxes?
I mean, I would love that to happen. I did actually talk with DOT here when they were doing their micro delivery hubs. So like on street, are you going to have space so there could be take back of packaging? There are examples in Denmark and the Netherlands, I think, of reusable. Repack is one, take back packaging. I mean, how to get Amazon to use it, I don't know. I would imagine federal legislation.
Well, that's very good, very helpful. Thank you, Claire, and thanks everybody for joining in the interaction and those questions. That's been absolutely awesome. So that brings us through, I think, to our time. Claire, one sort of takeaway thought for the audience, if they don't do anything else, what would you like them to do?
I think just realize how important design is, because everybody with waste, I feel, goes towards personal responsibility, and so many people don't have the motivation to do things right. But if we can design systems where it is easier for people to do the right thing, it just makes it so much less need to kind of push this kind of personal responsibility. I think it's all about designing the system in my mind. Waste is a design flaw. It's very difficult to do the right thing now, and we can't expect everyone to do it until we've designed better systems for them. That would be my
Completely
takeaway.
agree. No,
and I would like
excellent.
to thank everybody for those great questions and the participation. It made it a great webinar.
Yeah, no, that's good. And I think we say about waste diversion that knowledge isn't enough. Even the desire to do it isn't enough. You've got to have an infrastructure which supports that and makes it easy, because end of day, you're tired, you're hungry, the best will in the world. It doesn't all come together unless it's easy. So ease of use, convenience are the really key messages there, I think, that come through for me. So thank you very much, Claire. Really appreciate that. Thanks again, everybody that's joined. Enjoy the rest of your day. We will be emailing out a link to the recording when it's been edited, which basically means that it removes all my and and things like that.
Yeah. And
Thanks,
if
everyone.
anybody wants to know more about the centre, you can sign up for our mailing list. We don't email often. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Take care.